Welcome to the Retire with Peace podcast, the podcast where we help you create a fulfilling and stress-free retirement. Each week, we bring you expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you plan and live your best retirement life. Whether you're nearing retirement or already enjoying your golden years, this podcast is here to support you every step of the way. Let's embark on this journey together and discover how to retire with peace.
Welcome back to the Retire with Peace podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dave Zaegel, and we are wrapping up a series on inherited IRA rules, calculations, benefits, all the above, and it's been a lot of details. So hopefully you're able to hang with me. It's been a lot packed into 3 episodes so far. This is the 4th and final, where we're going to talk about beneficiary selection. So if you haven't listened to the first 3 episodes we did on inherited IRAs, please go do that first. Otherwise, you might miss some perspective on what we're talking about here with beneficiary selection, because this is an important piece to understand, especially under these new rules. Should we name our spouse and children? Should we name a trust? Should we leave it to the estate? All these different things. We're going to talk about that and why, but it's important to have that initial understanding that we've gone over in the first 3 episodes that we've done on inherited IRAs. So beneficiary selection. Typically what we will see with beneficiaries, which is generally the best way to do things, is the beneficiary, the primary is the spouse, and the contingent beneficiary are any children. There's always going to be exceptions to that, different family dynamics. I get that, totally fine. But you always want to name a beneficiary on these IRA accounts. We don't want to leave this up to the court to decide where the money should go. We need to be specific with who this money is going to at all times. That especially goes for if there's any changes, so divorces, remarriages, all those things. Really, really important to update the beneficiaries. Review those on a regular basis to make sure that they are still what you want. There's going to be different rules depending on whether it's an IRA or whether it's a 401k in terms of what might happen with an ex-spouse or a current spouse. There's different legalities. We're not going to go through all that in this video, but just understand that you need to keep those current. You need to review them. You need to make sure that the account has the specific beneficiaries that you want, because when you die, whatever that beneficiary form says is what goes, with some exceptions. Again, there might be some 401k rule exceptions, but for the most part, whatever's on that beneficiary form, that's where the money's going, whether you like it or not, or whether other people are happy about it or not, doesn't matter. So make sure that beneficiary form has exactly what you want on it. And it never hurts to update that as well. So even updating a signed copy every so often is a good thing to do, because that very specifically reiterates that, yes, this is what I want to have happen. You can't go back and say, wow, they signed that 15 years ago and here are all the changes and here's why we think it should be different. And everybody's all of a sudden paying a whole bunch of legal fees to go through these beneficiaries, which might happen anyway, because we've seen situations where this happens anyway. But if you have a more recent beneficiary form, closer to the date that you passed away, it's going to be much harder for somebody to challenge or try to do something crazy. So anyway, that was a long way of saying keep the beneficiaries updated, make sure that it is very specific on who you want the beneficiaries to be. And in most cases, it's going to be your spouse as the primary, your children as the contingent, but we'll talk about some exceptions to that here. One reason why it's really going to be important and helpful to have your spouse as the beneficiary is, we talked about this before, to where, let's say your spouse is younger and needs to be able to access that money if you pass away, and it needs to be able to access it without having an early withdrawal penalty. They can do that as the beneficiary on an IRA. So instead of doing a spousal rollover where they take your IRA and roll it into theirs, which is a normal thing to do and happens all the time, instead of doing that, they can remain as beneficiary on your IRA and take withdrawals from that, even if they haven't reached age 59 and a half, and they can do that without penalty. The nice thing is there is no deadline on spousal rollovers. So they can choose to remain as your beneficiary and be taking income from the IRA if they need that, but they might get to a point where they say, oh, okay, I don't actually need that anymore. Now I can take what's left in that IRA and do a spousal rollover. So just important to note, there's no deadline on the spousal rollover at all. They can be a beneficiary, take some distributions off the IRA if they need that, and then roll it over at a later time. So there's a lot of flexibility for surviving spouses. So this goes back to a point that I made in the last video, which is if something happens, somebody dies, especially if it's unexpectedly, don't rush, pause, let's understand what the rules are, because you can use a lot of these to your advantage. And we don't want to do something that would be irreversible, because once you do that spousal rollover, irreversible. You can't go back and say, oh, no, actually, I want to be a beneficiary so I can get some money out penalty free. Nope, too bad. You did the rollover. It's done. So when something happens, when somebody passes away, pause. Don't be in a rush. Let's make sure we gather all the proper rules. But most of the time, what we see is spouse is primary beneficiary, children are contingent, unless there's some family dynamic that you have going on that needs something different. Now, two things on estate planning. First, as a general rule, never just leave money to an estate. We've talked about this already on previous videos, and we're reiterating this now. Have beneficiary forms that are specific who you're leaving it to. Don't leave that blank and just say, it'll just go to the estate and they'll figure it out. That's not fun for anybody. It's expensive. It goes through the courts. The courts decide where it goes. And some people might say, my will's taking care of that. Don't count on it. The will is a guide for the court. It's still going to go to the courts. The courts are going to decide what to do with it. It's a mess. Don't leave it to an estate. Name beneficiaries. And we talked about this in our first video. If you leave it to an estate, it might be subject to 5-year rules instead of 10-year rules for distributions. It's a mess. Do not leave it to an estate. Period. Name some beneficiaries. Make everybody's life a lot easier. The next question on top of that is, well, should I have the beneficiary of my IRA be a trust? That was a very common thing to see in the past. The challenge now is that under the new rules, generally the answer is no. We do not want to leave the trust as the beneficiary of an IRA. There are going to be some exceptions to that. There could be special needs. There could be situations where you need to maintain some sort of control over that even after you've passed away, because somebody might take that money and ruin their life or really mess things up. So there can be specific situations in which you want to have the trust be the beneficiary of the IRA. But in most cases, if you are leaving money to healthy, competent, capable adults, we do not want to do this in a trust. We want to be naming them individually on the IRA. So that way they at least get some benefits of being able to stretch this out over 10 years and calculating what required distributions would be along that time. If you put it into a trust and it winds up in the trust's hands, it could most likely, with the exception of some trusts, it would most likely be taxed at trust rates, which are much higher. So the new rules that have come out from the Secure Act and beyond since the Secure Act really have eliminated a lot of the needs and the benefits of a trust being named as the beneficiary on a traditional IRA, unless there is some specific, really specific reason that you need to maintain this control or there's some special need. Unless that's the case, just name individuals as the beneficiaries on the IRA accounts. Hopefully I was clear on that, because I get a fair number of questions now is, should the trust be the beneficiary on my IRA? General answer is no. So I'm making that very clear. No, there's not any tax benefit to keeping a trust as the beneficiary on a traditional IRA account. Not anymore. There might have been in the past. With the new rules, there is not. So unless there is a very, very specific legal reason that you need to have the trust as the beneficiary, generally the answer is no. Just name the individuals. It's going to make life easier for everybody. And again, there's just no tax benefit anymore for having the trust as the beneficiary on an IRA. Last thing we'll cover, third thing, is on charities. So Traditional IRA is actually a great vehicle for leaving money to charity, or it can be if we do it properly, because the charity does not pay any income tax. So a lot of times we'll see where people might have something in their will that says, I want to leave, I'm making up a number, I want to leave $10,000 to this charity, or I want to leave X% of my estate to this charity. Which is great. That's awesome. Now, what's even better is if you have a traditional IRA, why not specify some of that money going to a charity instead? Because if you just took the traditional IRA and gave that to beneficiaries, that could be good, but they are going to be taxed on that money. And then your will might say, oh, we'll take this money over here on the side and give that to charity. Well, that's not great tax planning. That can all work just fine. But from a tax planning perspective, it would be better to take money out of the traditional IRA that will be taxed to somebody and send that to charity instead, because the charity is not going to be taxed on it. So what you can do is leave a portion of your traditional IRA directly to charity to get some additional tax benefits. One key to doing that, though, I recommend setting up a separate account for that. The reason being, when you leave money, the beneficiaries are going to be subject to their required distribution rules and different payout periods. With a charity, because it's an organization and not an individual, it doesn't have a expected life. With a charity, they have to take that money immediately out of the IRA, and therefore everybody else that's a beneficiary would likely also have to take it out immediately. That's a mess. Don't do that. So if you're going to name the charity as the beneficiary of the traditional IRA, which can be a great thing, just set up a separate account. Just have a separate IRA. You can have multiple IRA accounts. Just put a separate one off to the side and say, this one is specifically for the charity. We don't want the charity to be a co-beneficiary amongst other individuals on an account. Separate into a separate IRA account, leave that to charity. It's going to be much cleaner and also a much better way of tax planning if you're planning on leaving money to charity when you pass away. Again, we covered a lot, but just know a couple of key pieces. Generally, you're going to be leaving your spouse as the primary and children as the contingent beneficiary, unless there's something special going on in your family. Also, do not leave money to an estate or just not name anybody and think that the will is going to take care of it. Don't do that. Don't name nobody. Name some specific people as beneficiaries. And also, no need to put a trust as the beneficiary on a traditional IRA. There's no extra tax benefits. You only do that if you have some special need or special legal reason for doing that. And then lastly, traditional IRAs are a great vehicle to go to charity. Just make sure you split that out into a separate IRA account so you don't have co-beneficiaries with other people. Those are the highlights. We packed a lot in again. I hope you enjoyed this series on inherited IRAs. There's just a lot on it because the rules changed several years ago. We need to make sure that we're up to date on how we are handling this. It's going to make everybody's life easier and provide some better tax planning along the way. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. I really appreciate your support and hope you found value in the conversation. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might benefit from it. Your feedback helps keep the show growing. Until next time, take care and stay strong as we learn